Spam. This is Unit 242, and there's a lot of videos about rations, particularly military rations. I have a fascination with the home front in Britain during World War II, and Spam was a big part of every front, every single Allied front in Europe and the Pacific. Worldwide, this stuff traveled everywhere. Rationing in Britain was extensive and at times extremely painful. One person in 1 week was allowed 4 ounces of lard or butter to cook with, 12 ounces of sugar, 4 ounces of bacon. 4 ounces of bacon per week. Can you imagine? 2 eggs, 6 ounces of meat, and 7 ounces of tea. That was a weekly ration for one person. Now, the Home Guard, made famous by Dad's Army, was in charge of keeping Britain safe during Operation Sea Lion. They were literally the last best hope for the British people. And Spam was one of the things that they were issued. Spam traveled the world. If you look at Hawaiian cuisine, you'll find Spam. It was probably one of the only meats that they could get a hold of during World War II. Spam is basically a pig in a blender stuffed into a can. Now, I've got a single serving here. I'm going to leave this. One of the reasons that Spam is so awesome as a ration is that it has such a long shelf life. Spam came about in 1937. Hormel developed it as a long shelf life food reserve. It wasn't really until World War II that it came into its own, and a lot of things were said about Spam, believe me. I'm going to make a variation of a Home Guard sandwich. Now, during World War II, the Home Guard, well, Britain itself really had one of the worst breads that I think I've ever heard of, which is called National Loaf. It was a heavily fortified bread, heavy wheat, and depending on when in the war you talk about National Loaf, it was made in different ways. So I implore you, please go online and look up National Loaf. And for more information on Britain during World War II, especially about rationing, I'd like to point out a couple of YouTube videos made by the BBC. One of them is Supersizers Go, World War II Britain. It's a nice comical look at the rationing of food on the home front during World War II. Another one is The Wartime Farm. Again, an absolutely excellent series that can tell you so much about Britain during World War II. I've chosen to heat mine up. I have an aversion to just Spam straight up. It's rather nasty. Oh, I love it. My little cook stove is going to hum for us and make a song. Now, just about any kind of meat in a can could be used as a ration, and probably was, a great deal of it. Corned beef being one of the other canned meats that I can think of. A lot was said about Spam. Spam, again, is a wonderful website to go look at. There's another website that I like to go look at, skylighters.org, and they have a section on spam. And here's some of the strange spam facts from World War II. Spam was used as a B ration to be served in rotation with other meals behind the lines, overseas and at camps and bases in the States. However, many GIs were eating it 2 or 3 times a day. Could you imagine that? What if it was literally the only meat that you had to hand? What if it was the only form of meat protein you could get? And I think that's why the Hawaiians made such an art out of spam. And they have a lot of recipes. There were some really strange things that came out of World War II, not least of which, when Mom came home with food, especially meat, you weren't allowed to ask her where she got it or what it was until after dinner. Not sure exactly what that says, but throughout 1943, Hormel Foods hired more than 448 women to replace men serving in the war. Can you imagine that? At that time, women actually working in jobs? Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev wrote, "Without spam, we wouldn't have been able to feed our army." I heard an interview with a Russian tanker, and his comment was, we had bread, we had canned meat from America, which was our favorite. What else did we need? And they lived on that. I can't remember exactly what the Russian ration of vodka was per person per day, but I think it was something like 6 ounces. How'd you like to get that in a ration? Actually, I keep that in a car ration for my wife. There's a small bottle of vodka in a homemade MRE in her car, sealed in the trunk. Camping juice, I think I've heard it called. So here we have just a piece of Spam. And I don't have any National Loaf bread. Maybe sometime I'll think about trying a replica recipe of it, but not right now. And I'm a terrible bread baker. That really is not one of my fortes. So here we have a Home Guard style Spam and potato sandwich. Now that, on a freezing cold night in Britain during the height of the bombing campaign by Germany, the Blitz, or during Operation Sea Lion, the original invasion attempt by the Germans of Britain, would have been a delicacy. Can you imagine? And I don't think they had time to heat it up. Along with a hot cup of tea, that was a Spam ration. So very hearty. National Loaf was not nearly as good as what I'm eating here. And National Loaf had other uses. I've heard tell that they would filter the dye out of military gasoline so that they could put it on the black market. The military put a dye into the gasoline so that they could easily recognize it. And by taking a loaf of national bread, they would filter the gasoline down through it and take the dye out. Ingenious. Over 100 million pounds of Spam were issued in Lend-Lease. 100 million pounds. GIs like to call Spam the ham that failed the physical. Even Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote a letter to Hormel apologizing for saying bad things about their product in the heat of battle. I'm sure that more GIs had things to say about Spam than they did mud. Could you imagine having that, or a can about half that size, in your C rations every day, sometimes up to 3 times a day? Oh my. And the truth of it is, it's pretty good for being a pig in a blender stuffed into a can. Anyway, that was my wartime World War II reproduction Spam and potato sandwich from the Home Guard. I hope you enjoyed. I'm actually enjoying it. I would like to try some National Loaf and find out exactly how good or bad it is. And I suppose for nations that are pretty much hooked on white bread, it was a little hard to stomach, but still doable. I implore you to look up the wartime diet of Britain. It is an amazing adventure to listen to. The calorie intake in Britain actually rose during the war. And remember, rationing went on for 14 years. From literally the beginning of the war, for 14 years, long after World War II ended, it was still being implemented in Britain. And yeah, Karl Dunitz's wolf packs almost cut the supply off. They were very close to it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. This is Unit 242. I'm going to try to find some other interesting civilian rations from World War II, maybe from World War I, and I'll try to bring them to you here. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.